Within You is the Power by Henry Thomas Hamblin. Read to you by BlueFriend. Preface. There is a power lying hidden in man, by the use of which he can rise to higher and better things. There is in man a greater self that transcends the finite self of the sense man, even as the mountains tower above the plain. The object of this little book is to help men and women to bring their inward powers of mind and spirit into expression, wisely and in harmony with universal law, to build up character, and to find within themselves that wondrous self, which is their real self, and which, when found, reveals to them that they are literally and truly sons of God and daughters of the Most High. There is no way whereby the discipline of life can be avoided. There are no means by which fate can be tricked, nor cunning device by which the great cosmic plan can be evaded. Each life must meet its own troubles and difficulties. Each soul must pass through its deep waters. Every heart must encounter sorrow and grief, but none need to be overwhelmed in the great conflicts of life, for one who has learned the great secret of his identity with the universal life and power dwells in an impregnable city, built upon and into the rock of truth, against which the storms of life beat in vain. While this little work does not offer any vain promises of an easy life, for if this were possible, it would be the greatest of all disasters, but rather endeavors to show how to become so strong that life looks almost easy by comparison. The life or fate does not change or become easier, but the individual alters and becomes stronger. Yet it does show the reader how to avoid making his life more difficult than it need be. Most people's lives would be less filled with trouble and suffering if they took life in the right spirit and acted in harmony with universal law. It is hoped that this little book may help many to come into harmony with life's law and purpose, and thus avoid much needless suffering, to find the greater self within, which discovery brings with it a realization of absolute security, to bring into expression and widely use their inner spiritual and mental forces, and thus enter a life of overcoming and almost boundless power. Chapter 1. Infinite Life and Power. Man possesses, did he but know it, illimitable power. This power is of the Spirit. Therefore it is unconquerable. It is not the power of the ordinary life, or finite will, or human mind. It transcends these, because, being spiritual, it is of a higher order than either physical or even mental. This power lies dormant and is hidden within man until he is sufficiently evolved and unfolded to be entrusted with its use. The powers of the subconscious mind are dealt with in other chapters. The powers of the spirit are far greater and finer than those of the subconscious mind. Thought is a spiritual power of tremendous potency, but this is not the power of which we speak. By thought, Man can either raise himself up and connect himself with the powerhouse of the universe, or cut himself off entirely from the divine inflow. His thought is his greatest weapon, because by it he can either draw on the infinite or sever himself in consciousness, but not in reality, from his divine source. Through the divine spark within him, which is really his real self, man is connected with the infinite. Divine life and power are his, if he realizes that they are his. So long as he is ignorant of his oneness with the divine source of all life, he is incapable of appropriating the power that is really his. If, however, he enters into this inner knowledge, he finds himself the possessor of infinite power and unlimited resources. This power, then, is God's, yet it is also man's, but it is not revealed to him until he is fit to be entrusted with it. It is only when man realizes his oneness with his divine source that he becomes filled with its power. Many teachers and initiates lament the fact that certain secrets are being broadcast today, secrets that in the past were kept closely guarded. They fear that unillumined and unevolved people may make destructive use of spiritual power. This, to the writer, appears to be improbable. It is true that strong personalities who have a great belief in their own power to achieve and succeed draw unconsciously on hidden powers, and thus are able to raise themselves high above their fellows. The use, however, that they can make of spiritual power for base purposes is limited, and is not to be feared. There are others, of course, who are misusing their powers, and these are black magicians, and while they may do a certain amount of harm, they become reduced, ultimately, to beggary and impotence. There are also others who spend the whole of their spare time searching for knowledge of this very subject. They read every occult book they can lay their hands on, but they never find that for which they seek. There are spiritual powers and influences that withhold the eyes of the seekers from seeing until they are ready for the revelation. When man, in his search for truth, has given up all selfish striving after unworthy things, and has ceased to use his self-will in conflict with the greater will of the whole, he is ready for the revelation of his oneness with the infinite. Yielding implicitly to the will of the whole may seem, to the unillumined, an act of weakness, yet it is the entrance to a life of almost boundless power. Man is not separate from his divine source, and never has been. He is in reality one with the infinite. The separation which he feels and experiences is mental, and is due to his blindness and unbelief. Man can never be separated from spirit, for he himself is spirit. He is an integral part of one complete whole. He lives and moves and has his being in God, universal, omnipresent Spirit. And God, Spirit, dwells in him. The majority of people are unaware of this intimate relationship with the divine, and because they are unaware, or because they refuse to believe it, they are, in one sense, separated from the inner life of God. Yet this separation is only in their thoughts and beliefs, and not in reality. Man is not separated and never can be, yet so long as he believes that he's separate and alone, he will be as weak and helpless as though he actually were. As soon as man realizes the truth of his relationship to the infinite, he passes from weakness to power, from death unto life. One moment he's in the desert, far off, weak, separate, and alone. The next, he realizes that he is nothing less than the Son of God, with all a son's privileges and powers. He realizes in a flash that he is one with his divine source, and that he can never be separated. He awakens also to the fact that all of the power of the infinite is his to draw upon, that he can never really fail, that he is marching on to victory. It will thus be seen how great is the power of man's thought. While thought is not the power of the Spirit, it is the power by which man either connects himself up with the infinite power, opening himself to the divine inflow, or cuts himself off and separates himself from his spiritual source. Thus, in a sense, man is what he thinks he is. If he thinks he is separate from God and cut off from his power, then it is though this were really the case, and he is just as impotent and miserable as though he actually existed apart from God. On the other hand, if he thinks and believes that he is one with the infinite, he finds that it is gloriously true, and that he really is a son of God. If he believes and thinks that he is a mere material being, then he lives the limited life of a material being, and he is never able to rise above it. But if, on the contrary, he thinks and believes that he is a spiritual being, then he finds that he possesses all the powers of a spiritual being. Again, if he thinks that his work is difficult and that he is not equal to his task, he finds that really his tasks are difficult and beyond his powers. Yet on the other hand, if he believes his work is easy, or at any rate within his powers, he finds that such is the case, and that he can do his work with ease. The power within is infinite, for, by faith in it, man is directly coupled up with the spiritual power of the universe. The divine spark within him connects him to the sacred flame, thus making him potentially a god in the making. A change, then, must take place within man before he can enter into his divine inheritance. He must learn to think after the Spirit, for example, as a spiritual being, instead of after the flesh, or a material creature. Like the prodigal son, he must come to himself and leave the husks and the swine in the far country, returning to his Father's house, where there is bread of life enough and to spare. Chapter 2. The Overcoming of Life's Difficulties. The true object of life is that man may attain wisdom through experience. This cannot be accomplished by giving in to the difficulties of life, but only by overcoming them. The promises of God are not made to those who fail in life's battles, but to those who overcome. Neither are there any promises that man shall have an easy time and be happy ever afterwards. Yet it is after this that the majority of people are forever seeking an easy life, a good time, freedom from suffering and care. But in spite of all their seeking, they can never find that which they desire. There is always a fly in the ointment of their pleasure, something that robs them of true happiness, or possibly combinations of circumstances conspire to upset all their plans. Life is a paradox. The true object of life is not the attainment of happiness, yet, if we attain the true object of life, we find happiness. Those who are ignorant of life's true purpose, and who seek happiness high and low, year after year, fail to find it. Like a will-o'-the-wisp, it forever eludes them. On the other hand, those who recognize the true object of life and follow it attain happiness without seeking for it. In times past, people have made God a convenience. They have thought they could drift through life, learning none of its discipline, and then, when in trouble or things were not to their liking, they could pray to God and have the unpleasant circumstances taken away. That same idea is prevalent today. People have left the old orthodoxy and look to various cults and isms to get them out of their difficulties. They do not believe now that they can curry special favor with God by prayer, but they firmly believe that they can get what they want from the invisible by demanding it. They think that by this means they can have their own way after all. By this they mean having a good time with no unpleasant experiences, trials, difficulties, or adversities. They are, however, merely chasing rainbows. The easy life they seek constantly eludes them, simply because there is no such thing. The only life that is easy is the life of the strong soul who has overcome. His life is not easy in reality, but appears relatively so because of his strength. It is impossible to have an easy life, and if it were possible, then life would not be worth living, for the sole object of life is the building of character and the attainment of wisdom through experience. Life to all of us must always be full of difficulty, and it is to help those who, hitherto, have found life rather too much for them that this book is being written. What the majority are seeking for is an easy life, which they will never find, but precisely the reverse. And for them I have no message. But to those wise and awakened souls who are seeking for truth, no matter from whence it may come, and who desire to overcome life and its difficulties instead of weakly giving in to them, this book, it is hoped, will bring a message. At this stage, we cannot go into the subject of why we should meet with disasters and adversities in this life, nor why some people should have, apparently, a smoother life than others. We must therefore be satisfied to know that we have to meet trouble and overcome difficulty, and that it is only by doing so that we can obtain wisdom and build up character. The question is, then, not whether we shall meet the trouble and adversity or not, but rather how we shall meet them. Shall we be victorious, or shall we be submerged? Shall we overcome life's difficulties, or shall we give in to them? The majority of people are drifters on the sea of life. They are wafted here and blown there. They are also carried hither and thither by every current. It is only the few who realize that they have the power of the infinite within them, by which they can rise superior to all their difficulties, overcome their own weaknesses, and through victorious experience attain wisdom. At this point, Some practical reader may say that attaining wisdom is all very well, but what he wants is practical help. He is perhaps out of work, has sickness in his house, and is in debt, or he may be well-to-do and yet in the deepest distress and misery. To all such, I would say that they possess the power by which they can overcome all their difficulties, and through overcoming, attain wisdom. A man's success depends, more than anything, upon his faith in the good purpose of life, his faith in the power of the infinite within him, and his ability to overcome every obstacle in his path. The extent of the power that man can bring into his life is the measure of his faith in that power. If his faith in it is small, then his life will be feeble and lacking in achievement. If his faith in the power within him is large, then great will be the power manifesting in his life. The power of the infinite is illimitable and inexhaustible. All that is required is an unquenchable belief and trust in it. The weakest and most timid can make use of this power. There is the same power in the timid and weak as in the brave and strong. The weakness of the former is due to a lack of belief and faith in the infinite power within them. Difficulties and troubles there will be in every life, and sometimes disaster and heartbreak, when the very earth slides out from under their feet. Yet, by calling on the power within, it is possible to rise from the ruins of cherished hopes stronger and greater through experience. Happiness and true success depend upon how the troubles and difficulties of life are met. Adversity comes to all, but if it is met in the right manner, even failure can be made the stepping stone to success. Troubles come to all, but while it makes some people stronger and better in every way, it submerges others so that they never rise again. The trouble is the same. It is how it is met that makes the difference. Those who meet difficulty and adversity in the feeble strength of their finite minds and false personality are speedily overwhelmed and broken by the storms of life. But those who rely upon and have faith in the power within them can never be overwhelmed, neither can they ever be defeated. The power, being infinite, is always sufficient, no matter how great the need may be. One who realizes his own real spiritual identity knows that he can never die, that he can never be defeated, that he can never really fail. He may lose his body through the change that is called death, but he, the true man, can never die, neither can he fail. Though he be defeated 1,000 times, he must rise again. Only have faith in the spiritual power within you, and you can know all the joys of overcoming and achievement. All things will become yours. Seek first the kingdom within you, your spiritual union with the infinite and harmony with divine will and purpose, and all these things shall be added unto you. You will have no need to fear tomorrow, for you will know that all provision has already been made. There will be no need to hoard up wealth, for there will be the necessary daily supplies always available. There will be no need to live near a doctor, for God, the infinite life, shall be your health. there will be no need for regret or lamentation, for you shall know that all is well. There will be no fear of future happenings, for you shall realize that the Infinite One makes no mistakes. Chapter 3. Fate or Free Will? Great has been the controversy in the past over the vexed subject of fate versus free will. On the one hand, fatalists claim that man is so closely bound to the wheel of fate, it is impossible for him to live his life in any different way from the one which is mapped out for him. He can bring a quantity of first-class evidence in to support his claim, and he believes in his theory with all his heart. On the other hand, the advocate of free will believes just as wholeheartedly that man is not bound at all, being as free as air. He, too, can bring plenty of evidence in support of his theory, which confirms him in his belief. Each one of them thinks that the other is wrong, yet they cannot both be wrong. Let us therefore examine the subject for ourselves, for it is an important one, being intimately connected with the subject which this book discusses. First of all, let it be said, they are both wrong in part and right in part. Man is bound to the wheel, yet at the same time he has free will. Let us therefore explain this seeming paradox. It is an ancient truth of the inner teaching that man, when he is unevolved and before he is, so to speak, unfolded, is bound to the wheel of fate very closely. The unevolved man follows his desires, thus creating for himself a future from which he cannot escape. When, however, he becomes more evolved and emancipated, he begins to resist following his desires and strives instead to follow higher things. This creates for him a better future, and thus he becomes free in comparison with his former slave state. Man is a slave to fate as long as he is a slave to the desires of the earth plane. He is, however, free to overcome lower things and thus rise to higher. When he does this, he ceases to create a painful future for himself and thus becomes free. There is, therefore, fate which is self-created. It is necessary to acknowledge this before we can proceed further. One who has not had much experience of life, or who has not been a close observer, may deny that there is such a thing. But one who has had great changes in his life, against which he has fought and struggled in vain, knows that there is a purpose working behind the events of life, against which even kings and mighty men are powerless. There comes times in man's life when he moves heaven and earth, figuratively speaking, prays until he can pray no more, sacrifices, it may be, his money, his health, his prospects, and does everything that is in the power of a human being in a vain attempt to stave off threatened disaster. But in spite of all of his efforts, in spite of his cries to a pitiless heaven, the relentless march of fate cannot be stayed. It moves forward like a huge juggernaut and crushes his hopes, his dearest idol, his very life itself, or all that then makes his life worth living, and leaves him desolate. If then, you may ask, fate is so pitiless and so powerful, what can be done with it And where does free will enter into the matter? In reply, it must be admitted at once that it is no use fighting fate. The more man fights it, the more completely he gets broken. There are certain main events in each life which must come to pass. These events and changes are inevitable, and it is hopeless to fight against them. While these things, which constitute what we call fate, are inevitable and therefore cannot be avoided, it rests with ourselves how we meet these adversities and disasters. If we meet them in the wrong way, they break us. If, however, we meet them in the right way, we become stronger through discipline and experience, thus becoming better fitted to bear life's responsibilities and to overcome its difficulties and temptations. One who meets the setbacks, griefs, bereavements, and disasters of life in the right spirit becomes a strong and rich character. He becomes mellowed through experience, strong, stable, a helpful influence to all who meet him. When things go smoothly and life is a merry round, no philosophy or religion seems necessary, and as for inward power, what of it? We can do very well without it. So says the thoughtless and inexperienced. But there comes time in every life when not only is a philosophy, and that a very sound one, necessary, but also a power of which the finite self knows nothing is needed in order to raise the soul out of the dust and ashes of its despair. It is one thing to try to meet trouble and adversity in the right spirit, and quite another thing to have the power to do so. One who thinks that he has no power within him, but all the power is in circumstances, can never rise victorious over his troubles and become a conqueror over life's difficulties. But one who realizes that he possesses a wonderful power that can raise him up, no matter how crushed he may be, can never be a failure in life. No matter what may happen to him, he will play the man and act a noble part. He will rise from the ruins of his life and build it anew in greater beauty and splendor. At this stage, it is necessary to point out there is a difference between big fate and the circumstances of life. Big fate, as it is sometimes called, antedates this present life, and its causes does not come within the scope of this little book. Sufficient if we say here that, through the ages, we reap as we sow. Therefore, our future depends upon how we meet life and its difficulties now. Big fate, then, cannot be successfully fought simply because it is the working of omnipotent law. But our life generally, and its circumstances, depend on how we meet big fate, and how we recover from it. No matter how seemingly unkind fate may be, it is possible for us to make our life a beautiful thing. Inspired and energized by the power within, we can rise from the ashes of our dead hopes to build anew our life in greater beauty and more in harmony with the divine ideal. In addition to the fate or future which every thought and action builds, there is behind all evolution a gigantic plan. This wonderful plan that embraces all, from the stupendous conception of a limitless universe down to the smallest electron, is being worked out through the ages with absolute precision. Nothing can prevent this plan from being brought into manifestation. It gathers up our past and weaves it into our present life, just in the same way that it is busily gathering up our present life and weaving it into future fate. It works it all into the big plan somehow, and with infinite skill. The plan is bound to be followed. This too is fate. But how we follow it, either with willingness and happiness, or opposition and woe, rests with us. This is free will. Those who have studied the occult sciences may say, what about planetary influences? They will point out that, according to the ancient science of astrology, a man's life is determined by the star under which he is born. This is true if he gives in to the influences around his path. At different times in his life, man meets with influences that are sometimes favorable and at other times adverse. These influences are, however, only influences after all, and one who will stand firm during periods of adversity and refuse to give in, relying upon the great power within to carry him through, will find that he can weather all storms of life and come out of his trials greatly strengthened. He cannot prevent these influences from coming around his path of life, but he can rise superior to them. He will meet with failures and setbacks, but he will make of these stepping stones to success. He will experience griefs and bereavements, but out of these he will build a finer character and rise to higher things. One, however, who gives in to these things, refusing to rise again and reconstruct his life, condemns himself to further suffering, thus making utter shipwreck of his life. Let the despairing take heart again. Believe in the power within you, and you will rise to heights before undreamed of. With this power to help you, you can accomplish the apparently impossible. Our life here is not governed by a capricious being who blows first hot and then cold, or who favors one person and tortures another. The Supreme Being works through laws that are absolutely just and unchanging. Therefore, all disaster and trouble in the life is the effect of certain causes. These causes are our own wrongdoing in the past, which set in motion forces against which the power and wit and wisdom of man are powerless. However, because the fundamental law of the universe is love, it follows that the working of the law of cause and effect is not vindictive. Its object is our highest good. In other words, to bring us into union with the divine, or in tune with the infinite. Therefore, by rising up to a higher plane and coming more into harmony and union with the divine, we rob even big fate of something of its power. We cannot oppose it, for by doing so we will fight against omnipotence, but we can forestall it by doing willingly and of our own accord that very thing which experience comes to teach us. Another cause is that the soul has failed to learn certain lessons. Therefore, in this life, many painful experiences are brought to bear in such a way as to teach the necessary lessons. The lessons are, however, learned only if painful or unpleasant experiences are met in the right way. So long as man believes that he is unjustly treated by fate, and that he does not deserve what life metes out to him, He intensifies his trouble, both now and hereafter, through not learning the lessons that life desires to teach him. When, however, man realizes and admits that life is just, and that the cause of all his troubles is within himself, he, like the prodigal son, comes to himself and soon afterwards begins his homeward journey. Yet another cause is that soul is deficient in character. Strength and stability of character can be built up through the soul meeting trouble and difficulty. Again, it must be pointed out that they must be met in the right spirit. It will be seen, then, that our future depends entirely upon the way we think and act in this life. Our future lies in our own hands. If we violate the law of love in this life, we create disaster and suffering for the future, which will have to be met in the form of big fate, of a painful character in some day, some way. Therefore, by right thinking and right doing now, we not only ameliorate conditions in this life, but we also create a future that will be more harmonious and freer than anything we have experienced hitherto. It is also necessary to point out that even in this life, some of its big disasters are the results of thoughts and actions committed during this present existence. A young man may commit a folly that brings, in after life, a terrible retribution, or he may do another man a grievous wrong, and years afterwards someone else does the same wrong to him. It is always an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth on this plane of cause and effect. But the great way-shower, by his teaching of the power of love, enables us to rise above these lower things and live a life of harmony and peace.